beautiful, insecure, miracle she's
Tonight we're blessed to have Reverend Merle Lehman with us today, and instead of giving one of these academic, where I list his credentials, introductions, I'm going to introduce him just as a friend and a colleague. Merle has been involved with United Church of the Valley, with a Unitarian Universalist church in the area. He's a retired Methodist pastor, and he's one of those pastors that I look up to. One of those people that he's a man of great character, very friendly, and he's the kind of person that, you know, when I finish my ministry, I would like to be in the kind of position that Merle is now. And so thank you, Merle, for your gifts. He's one of the founding members of the Interfaith Council. And I have a soft spot for Methodist pastors from the 60s and 70s. I have a couple friends who are Methodist pastors that got started around that time, and they're just cool guys, all of them. And so I would like to welcome Merle Lehman. There we go.
This has something to do with the video. Okay. When Ghazala recruited me to give this lecture, she said, "Now I want you to speak for at least an hour." And I thought, wow. No one has ever asked me to speak for an hour. Well, I'm prepared to speak for an hour, but I don't think I can do that without taking a break somewhere in between. So my lecture has 4 parts to it, so after the two parts, then we're going to take a short break, and then we'll come back and I'll finish it up, and then we'll have maybe a half an hour for discussion. There are 4 things that people of faith or religious people have in common. See if I can get this up here better. I'm a manuscript preacher and lecturer. Like many other things in my filing cabinet, I got these ideas from someone else, but now I can't remember where they came from. Nevertheless, I have long thought that they ring true, and I want to share them with you. These are my notes, which I wrote long ago. Common threads which join religious persons. 1. Experiencing life and existence as a great and marvelous gift. 2. Feeling one's own inner intimate relationship with the universe and or with God. 3. Sensing an ethical or moral demand on oneself in dealing with others. 4. Feeling that life, and specifically one's own life, has value and purpose. Well, when I first wrote these 4 things down, and when I used them in my preaching, I considered them to be spiritual experiences which apply to persons of the theistic faith traditions, and which can be used to advance a sense of commonality in interfaith relationships. More recently, though, I have discovered, primarily through my participation in the Unitarian Universalist community, that these experiences are also shared by religious humanists. The Unitarian Universalists have a very large tent which shelters both theists and non-theists, and all of them consider themselves to be people of faith. Much of my understanding of religious humanism comes from UU humanists, or from the sources which I share with them. In this lecture, I intend to trace some of the sources which have produced this kind of humanism. I also intend to point to some of the ways the major faith traditions reflect these 4 experiences. When I was in high school, my best friend George and I wanted to take our girlfriends to the Indiana State Fair. but the fair was 140 miles away in Indianapolis, and we didn't have a car. George did have a driver's license and finally persuaded his father to loan him his car. So very early one sunny morning, the four of us set out to go to the fair. About an hour into the trip, we were driving down the two-lane highway when an approaching car began veering into our lane. George slowed down and got over to the right as far as he could, but the highway was built up with steep embankments and had no shoulders. The oncoming car hit us, pushing us over the grassy embankment. Fortunately, the grass was still wet with dew, and the car slid down rather than rolling over. Even though we tumbled off the seats and onto the floor, cars did not have seat belts in those days, none of us was hurt, but we were shaken up. Carefully getting out of the still rocking car and climbing up the damp, grassy slope, we saw that the impact had torn away the front bumper and the left headlight and had mangled the left doors. If we had been hit a few more inches to the right, George would have had the engine in his stomach, and the rest of us might also have been killed. George saw a farmhouse up the road and began to walk there to ask to use their telephone. These were the old days. I stayed with the car and the girls. In that moment, I felt a sudden exhilaration. We were alive. The sky had never been bluer, and the air had never been sweeter. Without thinking, I heard myself loudly singing, "Hallelujah, hallelujah, 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 praise ye the Lord." A little off key here. I was experiencing life and existence as a great and marvelous gift. And being a very religious teenager, I was spontaneously expressing my gratitude by praising God. People of faith celebrate life and are grateful for existence. Those who believe in a personal creator God are, of course, grateful to God for creating this world and placing them in it. Gratitude for life and for the means by which life is sustained is a basic religious response. The cynical and ungrateful person is essentially irreligious. Muhammad said that the ungrateful man is worse than an unbeliever. The Hebrew Psalter is filled with songs of praise. Experiencing life and existence as a great and marvelous gift is juxtaposed with our human sense of finitude. I often watch old movies on TV. Some of those films with stars like Fred Astaire, Ginger Rogers, and Jimmy Stewart were made before I was born. Sometimes I think, what I'm watching was done before I existed. And these young actors grew old and are all dead now. We know that there was a time when we did not exist, and a time will come again when we will no longer exist. And no matter how long we live, life seems fleeting. I will mark my 77th birthday this coming June, and I know that at my age I have lived longer than most people who ever lived. But still, time goes by quickly. It's precious. Friedrich Schleiermacher was a founder of the University of Berlin and was professor there. You like that name? Schleiermacher. You can say it with me. Schleiermacher. Schleiermacher was also the pastor of the Berlin University Church and preached every Sunday. Schleiermacher is known as the father of liberal theology. In 1799, he published a book entitled On Religion, Speeches to Its Cultured Despisers. Well, the cultured despisers were his friends and colleagues at the university and in his social circles. Influenced by the Enlightenment with its emphasis on reason, they had written off religion as irrational and superstitious. In this book, Schleiermacher radically reconstructed how to think of religion and how to approach it. He said that the origin of religion is the human experience of finitude. He called it the feeling of absolute dependence. Rather than beginning with scripture or doctrines about God or moral values, he based religion on existential human experience. The word he used in this book, Gefühl, feeling, in the phrase, the feeling of absolute dependence, was and still is misunderstood by his conservative critics, who say he was founding religion on the quicksand of shifting human emotions. But he wasn't pointing to a temporary feeling which comes and goes, like happiness or sadness or satisfaction. He was pointing to an apprehension which is prior to thinking or reasoning. In later writings, he also calls it an intuition. An intuition is something which is just given. What is given is self-consciousness, the gift of being conscious of one's own existence. This has also been called the self-transcending self, or being aware of being aware. And inextricably interrelated with self-consciousness is the sense of absolute dependence, the existential awareness of being finite. But as finiteness is incomprehensible with infiniteness, one's individual self-consciousness implies a larger whole of which the individual is a part. The feeling of absolute dependence implies something on which to depend, and that something is God. But God, for Schleiermacher, is not a supernatural object. God is the all, capital A, the all in which we participate. 150 years later, Paul Tillich, a German-American existentialist theologian, would write that God does not exist as an object alongside other objects. Rather, God is the ground of our being and is being itself. Schleiermacher taught that the place to look for God is not out there, but is in here. God is found in the core of one's own being. So the wellspring of religion for Schleiermacher is the human sense of being thrown into existence. As one of my teachers put it, we are just burped up by the universe into this time and place, and we are utterly dependent on the all, on the universe, on God. This is the starting point of religion for Schleiermacher. But how religion is then developed depends on the religious community, that is, on the relationships in which the person grows up and by which the person is influenced and taught. In the Germany of his time, one grew up in the Christian faith, and one's religious ideas were formed by one's relationships with Christian adults. Even though he did not develop this idea further, in pointing this out, Schleiermacher laid the groundwork for understanding that religions are faith traditions which are relative according to their cultures and history. But extrapolating from his basic idea, we can say that Schleiermacher introduced the notion that all religions come from one existential source and are relative, that is, are based on relationships, so none of them is absolute. So from this existential wellspring, Islam, Judaism, Hinduism, Buddhism, Baha'i, Christianity, and so forth were all developed. Even though we are grateful for life, we must acknowledge that pain is endemic to living, and we experience difficulties and sorrows as we live with accidents, diseases, separations, old age, and death, as the Buddha so eloquently pointed out. So a faithful response to life always has an in spite of quality to it. Existence is a marvelous gift in spite of the negativities which come with it. And having faith means knowing that there are possibilities for good in the future which cannot be seen from the present. There is a positive quality to life which those who look with eyes of faith can see everywhere, in children happily playing in a bleak and dirty yard, in a pretty flower growing in a trash dump, in a spider persistently weaving its web in spite of its being foiled again and again. A book was published by Clyde Reed in the 1970s entitled Celebrate the Temporary. The title captures the theme of the book. Our Greek heritage in particular teaches us that only the permanent is worthwhile. That which is temporary is of lesser value. Well, we know now that nothing is permanent. Everything is temporary. Life is always in process. If we put off celebrating life until we reach some permanent time in the future, instead of as it comes to us now, we will always miss it. The Unitarian Universalists are adept at taking Christian hymns and adapting the words to make them more universal in meaning. So using some heretical Unitarian Universalist-like adaptations, I will quote from the last verses of the last psalm in the Hebrew Bible, Psalm 150. Praise life with trumpet sound. Praise life with lute and harp. Praise life with tambourine and dance. Praise life with strings and pipe. Praise life with clanging cymbals. Celebrate with loud clashing cymbals. Let everything that breathes be grateful for life. Praise the source of life. When I was the pastor of the Wesley United Methodist Church in San Diego, the Islamic Society of San Diego met in our parish hall for their Friday prayer services. A member of that group, a young American Muslim and a former Methodist, told me how he was first attracted to Islam. When he was just out of college, he was bumming around Europe, not sure what he wanted to do with his life. He crossed over into Turkey, and in Istanbul he saw the Hagia Sophia, Constantine's church, which the Turks had transformed into a mosque. The exquisite beauty of the mosque touched him deeply, moving him to explore the faith and the God which it represented. Art is one of the ways through which people of faith can feel an inner, intimate relationship with the universe and or with God. The great Gothic cathedrals of Europe were built with the purpose of portraying a sense of mystic transcendence. Magnificent music has been written to the glory of God and can emotionally move us. People also find this in nature. A grove of giant redwood trees is often called a natural cathedral. We stand with awe and wonder when we look down into the Grand Canyon, or when we look up at the Milky Way. A psalm says, "The heavens declare the glory of God." And in an odd identity of opposites, this sense of awe, wonder, and insignificance can be transmuted into a feeling of an inner, intimate relationship with that which is experienced as the other. People of theistic faith experience the natural world as evidence of their intimate relationship with God. The Quran says, "It is Allah who splits the seed and the fruit stone. He brings forth the living from the dead and the dead from the living. Such is Allah. How then can you turn away from Him? He kindles the light of dawn. He has ordained the night for rest, and the sun and the moon for reckoning. Such is the ordinance of Allah, the Mighty One, the All-Knowing. It is He that has created for you the stars, so that they may guide you in the darkness of land and sea. We have made plain our revelations to men of wisdom." For theists, nature is sacramental and conveys the the divine providence and the nearness of God. Allah is closer than the jugular vein, the Muslims say. In Psalm 139, David reflects on his experience of the presence of God. O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know when I sit down and when I rise up. You discern my thoughts from far away. Where can I go from your spirit? Or where can I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and settle at the farthest limits of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me, and your right hand shall hold me fast. I would call this a kind of theistic mysticism, a sense of being in an intimate relationship with God. Theists also find a sense of personal relationship with God through prayer. When I was a campus minister at UC Santa Barbara, my United Methodist students had a joint meeting with the Muslim student group to get to know each other. Both groups were surprised to find that the students in the other group had meaningful personal prayer lives, which they felt put them in touch with God. Driving down Murrieta Hot Springs Road, I saw a bumper sticker on the car in front of me. It read, "Muslims do it 5 times a day." Islam is organized to be a God-saturated, prayer-saturated religion. Christianity has a deep and multifaceted tradition of prayer, ranging from group prayers like the Venerable Anglican Almighty God, unto whom all hearts are open, all desires known, and from whom no secrets are hid. Cleanse the thoughts of our hearts by the inspiration of your Holy Spirit, that we may perfectly love you and worthily magnify your holy name. Christianity also has individual, silent, contemplative prayer. Then there is the quirky, nonconformist, left-wing Christian author Anne Lamott, who says she uses only 3 prayers. Gail knows this one. Her 3 prayers are, "Help me, help me, help me." "Thank you, thank you, thank you." And "Wow." Other religions, of course, have their own prayer traditions which reflect moods of mourning or the need for forgiveness or the celebration of life and so forth. Non-theistic mysticism, like the Buddhist experience, can also give a sense of an inner, intimate relationship with the universe. This is understood as a sense of oneness with the interrelated web of existence, and as an overcoming of the difference between the subject and the object. Through meditation and wisdom, one experiences the other and oneself as being one. John Dewey was perhaps the most famous American philosopher in the first third of the 20th century. No, he wasn't the inventor of the Dewey Decimal System for libraries, nor was he the Admiral Dewey who defeated the Spanish fleet in Manila Bay in the Philippines. He was an extremely able and clear thinker who wrote on a huge variety of topics and is perhaps best known for his ideas on student-centered education. He was also intensely interested in religion and strongly influenced what we are calling religious humanism. Dewey's most focused exploration of religion is his short book, A Common Faith, which is a series of lectures he gave at Yale in 1934. In this book, Dewey makes a distinction between the words religious and religion. He defines religious as a quality of human experience and activity, that is an adverb, and religion as a noun, an institution based on authoritarian dogmas about the supernatural. Although Dewey never refers to Schleiermacher, I see a connection, because Dewey bases his notion of the religious on human experience. While he insists that the primary method for discovering what is true is the scientific method of observation and experimentation, which he calls the method of intelligence, rather than basing your beliefs on tradition and dogma, he also insists that ideals or values like love and justice and peace are real and have power. They're not just intellectual ideas. They have power to demand our allegiance and move us to action. He writes, and this is typical Dewey, any activity pursued in behalf of an ideal end against obstacles and in spite of threats of personal loss because of conviction of its general and enduring value is religious in quality. So, when you work to feed hungry children, or demonstrate for peace, or march for civil rights, or stand with a minority group against bigotry, you are being religious. Hearing this, you might not be surprised that John Dewey was one of the founders of the American Civil Liberties Union, the loved and despised ACLU. Dewey was a religious humanist. He rejected the supernatural, but affirmed a religious attitude or quality toward life founded not only on a response to ideals, but also on a sense of being interrelated with nature and with all of humanity. In the words of the 8th principle of the Unitarian Universalist Association, it means affirming and promoting respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. For Dewey, being religious means to understand that our lives are dependent on and sustained by our relationships with other people and our natural environment. He calls this attitude natural piety. To be irreligious, for Dewey, is to isolate oneself, to cut oneself off from relationships. This is his criticism of what he calls militant atheism and supernaturalism. Today we would call them fundamentalist atheists and fundamentalist theists. He writes, "What I have in mind is the exclusive preoccupation of both militant atheism and supernaturalism with man in isolation." Note, he wrote this in the 1930s, so man means humanity. For in spite of supernaturalism's reference to something beyond nature, it conceives of this earth as the moral center of the universe and of man as the apex of the whole scheme of things. It regards the drama of sin and redemption enacted within the isolated and lonely soul of man as the one thing of ultimate importance. Apart from man, nature is held either accursed or negligible. Militant atheism is also affected by lack of natural piety. The ties binding man to nature that poets have always celebrated are passed over lightly. The attitude taken is often that of man living in an indifferent and hostile world and issuing blasts of defiance. A religious attitude, however, needs a sense of a connection of man in the way of both dependence and support with the enveloping world that the imagination feels is a universe. Now, when I read this passage, I see two neighboring mountaintops with the militant atheist isolated on one and the fundamentalist theist alone on the other. The atheist is defiantly bellowing, "There is no God!" And the fundamentalist is saying, "It's just you and me, God. Just you and me." John Dewey didn't claim the word atheist for himself because of his aversion to what he considered aggressive atheism's arrogance. He preferred the word non-theist to describe his position. Although he did not use the word God himself, he didn't object to others using it as a metaphor to point to the process which creates the good in the world. So he was attacked both by the atheists and by those he called the religionists of institutional religion. The first said he was soft on religion, and so he was hypocritical. The religionists said he was an atheist, and so was an enemy of religion. He felt he was trying to save the highest values of the historic faith traditions while rejecting the dead hand of dogmatism and superstition. Religious humanists experience an inner, intimate relationship with the universe through contemplating our microcosmic and our macrocosmic relationships, quote, of both dependence and support with the enveloping world. These experiences are based on the discoveries of science, often the biological sciences. Dewey calls these relationships, in the broadest sense, the community of causes and consequences. We can think of ourselves as embedded in communities of relationships, from the smallest to the largest. In our imagination, we can see these communities as concentric circles, starting with the self, expanding to all of humanity, then to the interrelated web of existence of all living things, and finally to the extraterrestrial universe. The average human body is made up of more than 100 trillion cells, all of them descendants of the one original zygote, the egg cell from your mother that was fertilized by sperm from your father. The average body also contains microorganisms that enter from the environment, such as the bacteria that line the intestines and aid in digestion. These beneficial microbes colonize our bodies during and after birth and stay with us our entire lives. Recently, scientists have discovered that 1,000 different kinds of bacteria have colonized the epidermis, with different ones living between the eyebrows, the outside of the elbow, the inside of the elbow, and so forth. In fact, the average adult human body contains at least 20 times as many colonizing microbes as native human cells. And it has been recently discovered that the bacteria living on our fingertips are peculiar to each person, so their DNA can be used as a kind of fingerprint. Researchers at the University of Colorado Boulder swabbed 3 different keyboards for bacteria and then compared the results. They found that the people who used the computer keyboards were clearly identifiable because the bacteria left by their fingers were distinctly different. A Harvard microbiologist, Peter Turnbow, has proposed that since humans are composed of the sum of human and microbial cells, which are both necessary for the body to function, that we think of the human body as a supra-organism. So it is becoming more evident that we have symbiotic, interdependent relationships with the trillions of bacteria in our bodies, and that the bacteria themselves live in different communities within us. Now, in addition to perhaps 2 quadrillion bacteria who share our bodies in our life's journey, microscopic bugs have been discovered living in our eyelashes. These eyelash residents do no harm, and they can't be washed out, no matter how many times you try. So even though we may be unaware of these tiny fellow travelers, we are never alone. We certainly have an inner, intimate relationship with our biological microcosmic universe. Now, I could add additional expanding layers of the communities in which our relationships are embedded, such as our circle of loved ones, those who share our values, our religious community, our geographical and national communities, and so forth. But I want to jump to how we are all embedded in the human community. There is a strong tendency for people to separate themselves from other human beings based on things like nationality, ethnicity, language, culture, and religion. The tendency is to see us and them, Some of this may be due to xenophobia, a fear of strangers, a fear of what is different. Some may be caused by a need to feel that we are better than others. When I was a kid growing up in southern Indiana, in an all-white town, a common remark made by young men upon being asked, "How are you?" was, "Well, I'm free, white, and 21." Now this saying, which must have had very old roots, was a way of primping one's self-esteem. No matter how bad off I am or how incompetent I am, at least I'm not a slave, I'm not black, and I'm not underage, so I'm better than some others. In spite of our human xenophobia and the propping up of low self-esteem by putting others down, all people living on the earth today are literally one family. We are physically related because we all have two common ancestors. DNA research shows that all living humans are descended from a woman who lived about 170,000 years ago, probably in Africa. This is about 8,000 generations. This woman is nicknamed Mitochondrial Eve, after her mitochondrial DNA, the X chromosome, which was passed on to her offspring and then to all the rest of us. She is our parent via the maternal line. There's also a common father, a Y chromosomal Adam, who lived at a different time and in a different place. Mitochondrial Eve and Y chromosomal Adam were not a couple, and they lived with other people, but their maternal and paternal family lines are the ones which did not die out and have been genetically traced. So, all the people on earth are related. We are cousins. Whether we live in North America, Africa, China, Afghanistan, Iran, Syria, Russia, Greece, North Korea, Mexico, Israel, Palestine, whether we know it or not, or whether we like it or not, we are physically connected. Each of us is embedded in the human community and have similar needs and aspirations. We need to internalize this sense of human connectedness, cultivate sympathy for others, and become more sensitive to the ways we are the same in spite of our differences in culture, language, ethnicity, color, and religion. Now there is another kind of non-theistic mysticism which can give one a sense of an inner, intimate relationship with every living thing. It is based on reflecting on the evolutionary journey of our own human bodies. Neil Shubin, professor of anatomy at the University of Chicago, is the author of Your Inner Fish, a journey into the 3.5 billion year history of the human body. He had an article in the LA Times on this topic where he wrote, "We share deep similarities with all living creatures on our planet. Seeing the history inside our bodies is like peeling an onion. The first layers we see reveal the history we share with primates, large brains and opposable thumbs. Peel deeper, and we find the layers of history shared with other mammals, hair and breasts. Reptiles, our distinctive way of chewing food. Fish, arms, legs, backbones, and heads. Worms, an anus on one side of the body and a mouth on the other. Jellyfish, the DNA recipe that builds our bodies. Sponges, our many-celled bodies, and so on." You know, some Buddhist monks are taught to consider the profoundly temporary nature of existence by reflecting on the stages of the decomposition of a dead human body, a meditation technique which most of us would find distasteful and bizarre. But by using Shubin's idea of peeling away the layers or stages of history inside of our living bodies, we could reflect on how this reveals an evolutionary relationship with all animals. And it will give us an opportunity to meditate on how we are interrelated with all of life. We often hear that the chimpanzee is our closest non-human cousin, and that we share 98.5% of our DNA. But did you know we also share 40% of our DNA with the head of lettuce? So we are truly related to all living things. We also are embedded in the extraterrestrial universe, or even better, the universe is embedded in us. The elements which make up our bodies, like oxygen, carbon, hydrogen, calcium, and so forth, originated in the stars. We are composed of stardust. William R. Murray, a Unitarian Universalist pastor and seminary professor, is a religious humanist. In his book, Reason and Reverence, he writes, "I often go outside on a clear night and gaze at the sky, glittering with the lights of thousands of stars, most of them larger than our sun. As I ponder the unimaginable vastness of what I am seeing and the incredible distances between the stars, I am overcome with awe and amazement, and with a sense of how tiny the earth is and how infinitesimally small I am. I am cleansed of pride and arrogance and filled with a sweet sense of humility. To be struck with a sense of mystery and reverence at the natural world or at human creations is an experience that is religious in nature, and one that is common to many who identify as religious humanists." Besides feeling an inner intimate relationship with the universe and or God through art and nature, many people of theistic faiths feel a closeness to God through their scriptures, their sacred writings. Before writing was invented, every human group orally passed on stories of their history, their traditions, and their gods. When these were written down, these stories took on an even more sacred character. The words of the Vedas, the Sutras, the Torah, the Gospels, the Quran, the collection of sacred wisdom of the Sikhs, the writings of Baha'u'llah, and the scriptures of other faiths are understood to be either the literal words of God or a special message which originated with God. As the Orthodox Jews say, the Torah is like a personal letter from your Father written in love to you. Of course, you cherish a letter from your loving Father. There are time-honored methods, especially in Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, for reading and reflecting on the scriptures, intently listening for the voice of God, speaking through them with a personal message or lesson for you. And now we are going to take a break. Not a real long break. Let's see, how about 7.5 minutes? Something like that. Staying. And my wife said, "Was that half?" I said, "No, it was over half." She said, "It's a good thing." There is a small ethnic minority group called the Dong living in the mountains of China. The Dong people have no written form of their language, which is called Kam. Songs are the record of traditions and a mythic history that is 1,000 years old, or so the songs themselves suggest. If anyone in a Dong village is asked for a song, he or she will sing without hesitation. It might be a welcome song about keeping out invaders, melodies about growing old, or Dong favorites about feckless lovers. The older women tend the children during the day while their parents are out working in the fields. They raise their grandchildren from birth and immerse them in Dong ways. They sing songs to them about table manners and field chores, and about the moral good of selflessness and the moral evil of greed. Like all people of faith, these illiterate mountain people teach their children right from wrong. Selflessness is good, Greed is evil. This is the third thing which people of faith share, the sense of a moral or ethical demand in dealing with others. Now, I think there is a kind of innate human moral sense. Children playing together will sometimes say, "That's not fair." How do they know? All tribes, all human groups have some kind of code of ethics. Religions enshrine these codes as sacred, as God-given. The best known code of ethics in our culture is the Hebrew 10 Commandments. No other gods besides Yahweh, no idols, do not make wrongful use of the name of Yahweh, keep the Sabbath day holy, honor your father and mother, do not murder, do not commit adultery, do not steal, do not bear false witness, do not covet anything which belongs to your neighbor. These rules, along with the scores of other laws in the Hebrew Bible, were obviously intended to make community possible. Basically, they are practical rules for living together, which were given the force of sacredness. The Quran is similar to the Torah in that they both have rules concerning diet, health, and cleanliness, practical things which were necessary for the well-being of their original communities. However, religions then tended to enforce these God says moral rules with the theological idea of rewards and punishments. The ultimate reward was going to heaven, and the ultimate punishment was going to hell. A system of morality based on rewards and punishments is what adults impose upon children and masters upon servants. I can't help but think that the early Hebrew and Muslim communities were, to a certain extent, treated like children and servants. And their earliest codes of morality were often seen as applying only to their own communities. Buddhism was originally a monastic-based reform movement within Hinduism. Buddhism has 10 precepts rather than 10 commandments. The first 5 of the 10 precepts were for both the monks and their lay associates. Do not kill, do not steal, do not lie or deceive, no unchastity, and no intoxicants. These were understood not as divine commandments, but as disciplines needed for attaining enlightenment. The last 5 precepts were only for Buddhist monks. Eat moderately and before noon. Don't watch dancing, singing, or drama. No perfume or jewelry. No high or broad beds. Don't accept gold or silver. Although Buddhist ethics originated in a monastic community, the Buddha's compassion universalized Buddhist morals. Jesus' emphasis on the unconditional love of God for every person also universalized Christian morals. But Buddhist compassion, in principle, is more universal in that it clearly includes all living things within the web of existence. Christian concern for the welfare of people is clear, but concern for animals is more opaque. It seems to me that some people of faith go through a process of moral maturation. This is a shifting from do this and don't do that because God says so, to do this and don't do that because it is necessary in order to have a community, to I do this and don't do that because these are the right things to do and I want to do them. Perhaps we can call this growing up, becoming an adult and internalizing morality. There is a journey from behaving a certain way because an authority tells you to doing what is right because this is what your peers expect, to yourself becoming the parent and the peer. Even though he is inconsistent in his writings, which have become a part of the New Testament, Paul of Tarsus points to this notion of maturation in chapter 13 of his first letter to the Corinthians when he says, "When I was a child, I spoke like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became an adult, I put an end to childish ways. And now faith, hope, and love abide. These 3. And the greatest of these is love." The Greek word Paul uses here for faith is pistis, which can mean belief or trust. Later on in the New Testament, it is used to designate the faith or the Christian belief system. But here, it's better understood as pointing to relationships of trust. I think the moral demand is best described as what happens in relationships, in community, rather than being a law promulgated by an authority. It is well known that every religion's teachings include some form of the Golden Rule, either in its positive form, do to others what you want others to do to you, or its negative form, don't do to others what you would not want others to do to you. Now, isn't that interesting? Now, why is that? Some theists would say it's because there is one God who is speaking through all religions. Religious humanists would say it's because most people can identify with others, and it makes us feel good to help others and treat them with compassion and respect. This latter point of view has support from recent studies of brain chemistry. There's a new field, the new field of neuroeconomics, measures brain activity while people make economic decisions. Paul Zak of the Claremont Graduate University, quoted in the Los Angeles Times, found that countries with higher levels of trust in economic transactions are more prosperous. Countries with low levels of trust have very few economic transactions and don't create wealth. The biological basis for trust, he found, is the release